Power Up Gaming, the only destination you need for retro video games, consoles, and accessories. Want access to exclusive specials? Like us on Facebook.
So here's a system that I've kind of neglected to do a video on, and I apologize. It should be one of the first ones we actually do a video on, just based on the amount that we actually do and the amount of people that are actually doing it. Plus, there's an additional thing you can actually do, which a lot of people don't do, which will make your games rated a little bit easier, but also allow you to play some of the non-licensed games a little easier. Depending on what model of system you have, you may end up having to do this mod to actually get games like the Action 52 to actually read in your system. I've only found a handful of systems that don't actually read the Action 52, and I don't know which model of board it is, but there apparently is some systems that do not read like the Action 52 and some of the pirated cartridges without having the Lockout chip disabled. But I'm going to do a NES 72-pin replacement, and I'm going to go through all the procedures on it. Realistically, the only thing you need is a Phillips screwdriver, so that's the star bit. Nice and simple, just a good star bit screwdriver, and anybody can basically replace it. Just takes a little bit of time. May make it look a little bit easier because I've done a billion of these things, but we're going to walk through the whole entire process, including cutting the proper pin on the lockout chip, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue on. So just looking at the system here, so there's the bottom of the system, which is going to be very hard to get into the picture here, so we'll do it in shots. There's 6 screws at the bottom. They're very, very obvious which ones they are. A lot easier with a magnetized screwdriver, but we'll take out the 6 screws on the bottom here. And I'm sure I'll talk about 72-pin connectors and the different types that are out there. I'm also going to be doing a video on the another product that we're going to be bringing in very shortly, which is an alternative to the regular 72-pin connectors. Let's just move that down there so you can actually see the screw hole. So when it comes to 72-pin connectors, there's a bunch of products out there. The one we normally get is from Hyperkin. It's their bulk connector. I like the Hyperkin one because it is it's a connector is not as tight as some of the other ones that are out there. Some of the ones that come from Taiwan that you'll find from other manufacturers are extremely, extremely tight. And when you're actually looking at the NES connectors or the NES cartridges, on the inside of the cartridge, it's the actual PCB is actually held in by plastic support pieces. And the problem is, if you actually change out the 72-pin connector with one of the really, really tight ones, there's a chance that when you're pushing it in or you're pulling it out, first off, it's extremely hard to actually get a good grip on it, to actually pull it out or wiggle it out. But there's a chance you're actually going to end up breaking those little support arms. And yes, you can super glue them in and everything else, but if your system's that tight, you're just going to end up breaking it again. Super glue is not a permanent fix, no matter what you tell you or they tell you about super glue. So I prefer the ones from Hyperkin because they're not as tight. They're more like the original ones. The last shipment we got was these ones, which are from Repair Box. They're not as bad as the Taiwan ones, but they are tighter than the original ones. These are good. They read better than the Taiwan ones, and I believe that's because they are tighter. Yeah, I'm not sure I like the how tight they are, but the process is exactly the same, so it doesn't make a difference on that side. So we've got the top cover off with those 6 screws, and those 6 screws are just sitting over here. And then from here, what we're going to do is, if you're just changing the 72-pin connector, we're going to remove a few other screws in this, but what we need to do is get this top metal cover off. And really, there's 2 screws on the side here. Every single one of these screws is exactly the same as even the ones from the outside cover, except for 2. And those are 2 that actually go into the 72-pin connector. So on the side here, there's 2 more screws, which we're going to take off. And then further over here, we have one screw there, one screw there, and one screw there. So we're going to take these ones off. Okay, so from here, this top cover, you can kind of wiggle it off and take it right off and put that aside. Now we're looking at the actual cartridge slot. So the cartridge slot just has a little locking mechanism in place and the little springs. Okay, so I mentioned that two screws are actually different. Is these guys here, these silver ones. They're a little longer, and those go into the actual cartridge slot. It goes all the way down into the outer casing. So we'll take those ones off. Those are the only ones you have to remember. Again, like I say in all my videos, we're actually going into plastic. So when you put these screws back in, you don't have to remount them. Just make sure they're tight. These are notorious for stripping. Any of these screws are notorious for stripping. So it doesn't cause much of a problem. It's just more of an annoyance for somebody like me to actually see these systems with stripped screws. Just try not to strip them. There's no point in stripping them. You don't need to remount them that much. So I've removed the 6 screws, so 3 on this side, 3 on this side, and that cartridge slot, or the cartridge connector, is now off. The other 2 that I'm going to take off is this one down here, and this one over here. It's the last 2 that connect the actual main board to the outer casing. So now everything is disconnected from the outer casing of the bottom here. So you can actually pull it up and off. And what we're going to do is there's a blue connector here that we're just going to wiggle and remove. And then there's the joystick ports. One there, and player number 1, which is that guy right there. We're going to disconnect those. And we can remove that for now. So this is what we're dealing with. This part here is just the cartridge. And we're going to remove that and put that aside. At the bottom here, we just have this metal plate. We'll remove that, put that aside. And now we actually have the main board. So what we're going to do is just kind of wiggle the old 72-pin connector off. And this guy here, just to give you an idea. And when we're talking about, this is a stock connector. I'm not sure if you can see inside there. There's a bunch of pins that are actually pretty bent. You can see they're not the same shape as all the other ones. That's going to cause a problem to read. And there's a lot of people that boil these connectors and everything else. I'm not a huge fan of trying to save the standard connectors. These get extremely loose. And I mean, there's a lot of enthusiasts out there that save them and everything else. I don't. I've never been a fan of it. I'd rather change it out with a brand new connector. Our connectors, once they change out, read extremely well, especially when you do the chip or the lockout chip disable on them. The lockout chip, basically, the reason we do that on a lot of these systems, or we recommend it to customers, is the cartridge slot only has to read less pins. So the system here, actually, this chip that I'm pointing to, is actually like the lock, and the cartridge itself has a similar chip on it, which is actually the key. And when the cartridge actually goes into the slot, the two communicate with each other, and the key actually unlocks the system to actually read the cartridge itself. So the key in the cartridge actually unlocks the system to read the cartridge. Disabling this here means that the system's no longer looking for the actual key. That key is actually transmitted through multiple pins on the actual cartridge itself, and eliminating that actually eliminates multiple pins on the connector for the cartridge itself, which means less pins actually have to read through the actual cartridge connector, which means your games are actually going to read a little bit better. Again, the other advantage is that you will never have a problem with running foreign games, with running unlicensed games, any kind of repros or anything along those lines. The lockout chip is disabled, so if you can run any kind of unlicensed stuff. So right now we're going to grab this connector and we're going to get rid of it so we don't get it confused with the other one that's in the box, which, okay, it's right there. Sorry, I was going to say, I don't even know where I put it. So what we're going to do here, we're already zoomed in, and I don't think I have my, no, it's not hooked up right now. Okay, so you're going to have to take my word for this because I can't get close enough. I'm going to move these capacitors out of the way just so I can get access to this chip here. And you can actually see it. So just grab my little pointer here. This is the chip. It's a 3193A chip. It's surrounded by these three capacitors that I've just pulled out of the way. The reason I pulled them out of the way is because pin number 4 right here is the pin we need to cut. So this pin here, we need to actually eliminate that pin there to actually get the mod to go. So I'm going to grab, I think my cutters are actually over here. Yes, good. Okay. So we're going to carefully go in here with our cutters. We're going to grab that pin number 4.
Are you looking for cash or trade? Because we don't give cash. We only do trade on this one. Depends on what. I have to look it up.
Okay. So it's going to be extremely hard to show you again because I don't have the telescope hooked up. But I don't know if you can see that, but I'm sliding the tool right underneath there. And I'll be back in 1 second. Okay, and we're back. Sorry about that. I just need it at the front of the store. That's why I do most of my videos after hours. Okay, so we've got the system back down at this point. And let's see if I can get a close-up. So you can see there. Where's my pokey tool? There it is. Okay. So if I can do this reverse angle here, oh, so close. Okay, right there. So the 4th pin has actually been cut, and you can see that there's space there. So that's the lockout chip. So once you cut that, you're good to go. Lockout chip is disabled. Okay. So next thing we need to do is actually clean up this pin connector. It's been on there for, going on 20-something years. So most people at home are using rubbing alcohol. Works great. We use a PC board cleaner called MEK, methyl ethyl kerosene, which is corrosive. You can't buy this stuff locally or anything. Some people in the States can buy it in bulk at, I think it's Home Depot, somewhere like that, but up here in Canada, you can only buy it in 4-liter containers. Does an extremely good job at cleaning connectors, but most people don't have access to it. Rubbing alcohol works extremely well too, so rubbing alcohol should do a fine job. So as you can see there, I mean, not that much dirt that comes off, but I always like to make sure that we actually have a clean surface that we're actually connecting to. So from here, the other thing you want to make reference to, really there's only one cap that you can actually take a look at, which is the 2200 microfarad cap. Just make sure it's not ballooned out. This is your main power cap. There is multiple other caps located inside, which you can't get access to. I think I did another video, and I think it's actually posted on the replacement of these caps. Each one is slightly different as far as the board revisions. Like this one here is an NES CPU 07 board, which is slightly different than some of the other ones as far as the cap placements and everything else. But if that one's bulging out or anything else, some of them are starting to get a little old and they're starting to get a little worn out. So if you have no power going to the system at all, first off, try your AC adapter. A lot of the AC adapters are dying. If it's not the AC adapter, then there's a good chances that that capacitor right there has blown. The replacement of that one is extremely easy. If you're replacing that one, you might as well replace the other ones inside. The other ones go for the audio video ports. There are audio caps and video caps on there. So that'll get those all changed out to brand new ones. The rest of the caps on the board, I think these are Rubicon caps that they use on these. They're pretty good caps. Yeah, they're Rubicons. So the caps that are on these are actually pretty good. I wouldn't see a problem with these ones. I've never seen one of these actually go bad, so I've never actually replaced any. I mean, if you feel like it, feel free to replace them. But I don't think there's going to be an issue with those at any point in the near future. The ones we're really worried about is the surface mount caps that are used on Turbo graphic systems, Turbo Dual systems, Turbo Express, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Sega Game Gear, which other ones? Sega CD. Both models of the Sega CD, actually, Generation 1 and Generation 2. Which other ones are we getting a lot of replacements of? A lot of the surface mount ones are starting to leak. There seems to be a whole generation there of really, really bad caps. And once they start leaking, it becomes a major problem. The other one to make note of, now that I'm on this tangent of caps, is Xbox Originals. There's a 1K ferret. So 1K ferret that actually, it's not even a 1K ferret, it's a 1 megafarad capacitor that actually is for the time clock. But I decided to use that rather than a battery. And it is leaking on all systems. Most of them, depending on the motherboard revision, don't actually need it in the system. But it's causing a lot of problems with the buttons on the front of the systems. And we'll go through that at some point in the future in a video. But that's another one that's leaking. So anyways, getting back to why you're watching this video. So the 72-pin connector. So we'll break open the new one, which I've already opened. So looks identical to the original. The one thing you want to make sure is that there's no manufacturing defects. Every now and then I've found maybe 1 in 200 that has some bent pins. If this bends back here, it will bend the pins inside. So you want to make sure that none of those are actually bent. This part here goes to the board. So make sure these little wings here are actually located on the actual board. And right now the board is actually in an upside down position. So this is the actual top of the board. So make sure that we're putting it on the right way. So when you're sliding it on, you just want to kind of start at one side and kind of wiggle it on and then follow through on the other side. And then it's completely on. Now the next part, actually we'll put on the metal cover first. When you're putting on the metal cover, just make sure the metal pieces actually don't go into the actual connector there, otherwise it won't sit flat, and the metal connector's on there. You could put the tray on there. I'm going to hold off for a second until it's back into the actual system, just so I'm not handling as much. The only thing you got to be careful of when you're actually putting the connectors back on is making sure that these wires here are not sitting over the mounts. If they're sitting over these mount holes, you will end up crushing the cables, end up cutting through the actual insulation themselves, and you'll have problems with the actual controllers themselves. So when you go to put it back together, make sure that you're when you're looking through the actual holes, that those cables are actually pushed out of the way properly. So this one here is player 2, this one is player 1, makes sense, player 1, player 2. They go into the ports identical, player 1, player 2, and then the big blue one here. They only go in one direction, so you can't put them in upside down. So we'll put the blue one on first, just kind of wiggles in. Player 2, player 1. We're going to make sure that all those cables are kind of nicely tucked out of the way I want them. So it's nicely down there. All these cables I can see, even from looking at it, that those cables are all kind of out of the way. None of them are actually sitting on the mounting points. And then I can take a look at this here and actually position it in. And the way I always position this, the one thing to keep in mind, and this is where a lot of people screw up, they end up putting it back together, and then the actual mechanism won't, when they screw it down, it won't actually go down. It kind of goes down and it won't lock into position. They're like, what the hell did I do? The reason for that is this little lip here. This lip actually tucks underneath the board here. So if you actually just put it in there and you slide it into place, that lip, this lip here, will actually sit on top of the board. And that's actually put in wrong. And a lot of people do that. I've done it the first few times I did it. I did it that way and I couldn't figure out why, and I ended up having just to loosen these screws a little bit to actually sit it up higher so that actually the lock mechanism worked. It wasn't until I did a few more that I actually realized exactly what I was doing. So when you're sliding it on, kind of lift the motherboard up a little bit, hold the pin connector in place, and you're gonna kind of lift it up. And this is hard to do on video. It's a lot easier when I have the system turned the other way. And then you're gonna put your hand underneath and actually feel the lip sliding into place. And if I did flip that upside down, you would actually see that lip fitting there. But I mean, a good way to tell is try and lift up the front of the case. If the front of the holder, the cartridge holder, doesn't pull up, then it's in place. And then from here, you're going to wiggle it back into place. Again, make sure that your cables are not tucked into a spot they're going to be pinched. Make sure that's all sitting nice and flush. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a few screws in here. Long silver screws. These ones actually hold the whole entire cartridge in place along with the connector. So the silver ones are great to throw into place to actually hold everything into place. Again, don't ream on them. No reason to strip them. Just until they're tight. And if you look, nicely locks into place. There's not an issue there. Okay. So from there, what we're going to do is, again, capture card not working right now, so you have to take my word for it that it actually reads perfectly. And what you'll see is you'll see how the reason I don't necessarily like these connectors over the Hyperkin ones, but they're perfectly acceptable. They're not too tight, and they do work extremely well. So let's get the proper cable I need. And then we'll get my trusty duck hunt. And get the TV on here. Should be on the right setting. There we go. Okay. So in most cases, it'll actually read in the up and the down position. So we're getting the duck hunt on the screen, no problem at all. And what we'll do is we'll pull it out a few times. So as you can see here, it's a little bit of force to get it in and out, which is actually, oops. Rather than turn on the system, I turned off the TV. So again, give it a minute to actually turn back on. But that'll read perfectly the first time again. So I'm kind of cheating here because normally you don't have access to it. So normally you have access just to here. So as you can see, you kind of have to wiggle it to get it to actually come out. Push it in, and you're good to go. So 3 for 3. Try it again. 4 for 4. And this will loosen up over time too. 5 for 5. Okay, so we're good here. I feel safe putting this back together. So as I mentioned, these connectors are tighter than the Hyperkin ones we normally use. Is it an issue? Not really. The connectors do loosen up over time. It's not a bad thing to start with a tighter connector that's going to loosen up rather than start with a looser connector that's going to loosen up even more and actually cause you problems earlier. it's not tight enough that you're going to have a problem with the cartridges really breaking. You can still pull the cartridge out. Is your 60 or 80 pound, sorry, let me rephrase that because otherwise she's going to be very, very young. Is your 100-pound girlfriend going to have a problem pulling out the game? Maybe. She might have problems. For that, I apologize. You know, it does take a little bit of muscle the first little while to actually get the game out. But anyways, as I was doing that, I was just putting the other gold screws into place on that one. And then we're going to grab the other two screws that actually hold the board. And the corners over here are the two screws that actually hold the board down. Yeah, so it is a little tight, but not enough it's going to cause a lot of problems. So beginning to end, I know I'm rambling on, and you know, we're shooting a video and everything else. Beginning to end, you can do one of these once you get good at it in about 15 minutes, including the chip, the Lockout chip mod. The only thing the Lockout chip mod actually requires you to do is actually remove the main board too. The only reason we charge a little extra is because obviously there's a little bit more risk on our behalf, because if the connection gets done wrong, or a secondary pin gets cut or gets clipped, or the chip breaks or something else, then we're required to actually repair that, obviously, which means we would have to run a trace. Doesn't happen too often, but there's always that possibility. So we charge for the pin connector replacement. We also charge a little bit for the Lockout chip. It's just a reassurance to the customers that it's actually done right. A lot of people, even though this is a very simple repair, a lot of people don't want to do the repairs themselves, especially when they can have somebody else do it properly for them the first time. Okay. So we've got the top cover in. We've got 6 screws left, which means we're perfect. We've got all the screws we actually need for the top cover. We haven't forgotten anything. We're going to slide the top cover on, slide it over. Put the 6 screws back into the system here. The other thing I should mention is after you've done the Lockout chip mod, you actually don't get that same effect that you used to get when you had a bad connector, where you actually get the flashing screen or the flashing red light. The flashing red light is actually caused by a problem trying to read the actual connector. And the side effect of actually doing the Lockout chip mod is that you'll probably get a solid color on the screen rather than a flashing light. So you'll always get a red light on the system, a solid red light, rather than a flashing red light. Yeah, and that's just a side effect of that. So going forward, you will now have the flashing red light, but you'll have the same similar situation. So again, this is the actual cartridge going in. So the cartridge goes in fine. As far as pulling it out, it does take a little bit of effort. It's just wiggling it back and forth a few times, and the cartridge pulls out. So it's not a lot of effort, just a little bit of wiggling. And again, it will loosen up over time to where the hyperkin starts out. The hyperkin connectors start out. So Repair Box has done a good job at producing cartridges or connectors that are tight, but not overly tight that are going to cause problems. So there's a video. If you have any comments, questions, or anything else, please put them below. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And if you have any suggestions for upcoming videos, please put them in the comments below, and we'll try and do your videos. Thanks, and thanks for watching. See ya.